Hello, I'm John Fenn at the American Folklife Center, and I'm here with musician, percussionist, composer Jaimeo Brown.
Yes.
We're going to talk a little bit about the way you've been incorporating field recordings into the kind of work you've been doing, stuff you've been finding in our archives. But first,
Yes.
I want to hear kind of brief background of yours in music. How'd you get into what you're doing?
Yes. I was blessed to come from a musical family, mother and father, both musicians and educators, and did a lot of work for the Endowment for the Arts. My father, Dartanyan Brown, my mother, Marcia Miget, did a lot of traveling in the 80s with the Endowment for the Arts, and I was carrying equipment while they were traveling to different colleges, teaching about music and music education, and I kind of resisted it as a result of the parent factor there until later on, around 16 years old, I discovered the drums, or maybe the drums discovered me, and I eventually was now in the position to have to catch up. So after really looking at musicians like John Coltrane, and some of these were my initial heroes, I started practice 8 hours a day on the drums, and eventually moved out from California to New York City. Went to William Patterson University. It was headed by Rufus Reed at the time, incredible bass player and educator. And in that period of time, that was the real education of being in the streets of New York, performing, and just being around that artistic scene in New York, and being of the generation where I was really trained to be a musician, following the traditions of jazz and music that was a bit older. Of course, my generation was also a generation of hip-hop and electronic music and sampled music. And so it was always a very natural fit of being able to merge music that was very organic and acoustic with music that was more digital. And so a lot of the music that I heard, hip-hop artists like Jay Dilla and some of these producers really just became extensions of being able to create what I was hearing. And so I eventually discovered an incredible group called the G's Bend group, and they are a group or a community, really, so more in G's Bend, Alabama. And this led me on a long path of really getting into discovering some of the oldest sources of African American music in the country, and eventually went back to Rutgers University to get my master's. And my thesis was on how the earliest, some of the early music of the church, the black church, influenced jazz, rock, contemporary music, so to speak. And as that journey began, I wanted to hear more of what the earliest music sounded not just conceptually from reading, but actually hearing it. And so that led me to of course the Library of Congress, which of course led me to works of Alan Lomax and so many other historians who gave me the opportunity to actually really be able to hear the sound quality, which is going to change through generations. There's certain sounds in the voice, the characteristics of the voice that you just don't hear anymore. So that led me to the process of saying I really need to capture this sound. So I started to figure out how could I take some of these samples and include them into composition and into production. And so this archive here has been a huge source of inspiration and a huge source of information and history that has informed what Transcendence is, which is my group that really focuses on bringing art, history, and technology together. And so this archive, being here and being able to perform here tonight, and it's just it's a big circle completing, and it's just a great honor to be here.
Well, it's interesting hearing you talk about the sort of the elements of the sound, because there's a certain texture in field recordings.
Yes.
And we'll get to the ones that you sort of hit on.
Yes.
But I was just wondering, to what extent, as you're going through this trove of historical recordings,
Yes.
and our archives are elsewhere too,
Yes.
what's catching your ear as a composer, as a percussionist, as someone that grew up with hip hop and jazz?
Yes.
You know,
yes.
there's some of that spirituality and some of that stuff, but is it like
You know, we live in a digital age now, and everything is becoming more micro. But when I was going through reel to reel, and hearing not just the sound of the voices, but the sound of the actual first recording instruments ever used, it's going to give a certain character to the music that I think is very important, especially when I'm thinking about balancing those two worlds together. And so those voices and the sound of the times coming through the accents and just to be able to actually hear time in this age, we're only 100 years now where we're actually able to record these things. I think these things just come out so loudly and just give me ideas for balancing. Oftentimes I'm trying to balance that idea of future and what is ancient and what is future. And some of those sounds really capture that almost ancient sound, in a sense, being the oldest recordings that we actually have.
And that element of time and history is interesting too when you think of when something you just said, like Lomax was recording on instantaneous discs, right?
Yes.
So it was recorded in the moment, not easy to copy. When we copy them to tape, which is how you might access them then if they're not been digitized.
Yes.
So there's kind of a theme of time and texture that's
definitely
working in what you're doing with
100%.
This stuff too.
100%. I think that's I think largely what in this also generation I think helps balance the speed of technology and how fast that it's moving, and because of that exponential growth of technology, I think that there was part of me that was really drawn to that actual quality, and there's just real work put into some of the early recordings and how they were actually recorded in the first place, and physically how it was done, and all of that definitely comes through in the music.
And I mean, just thinking about some of the songs some of the field recordings you're dealing with that are turning into compositions. A few of them are work songs.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. So could you speak a little bit about what you are hearing when you're hearing these work songs?
Sure. Yeah. Some of these work songs were sung the Parchment Farms prison in Alabama. So you're hearing actual inmates singing work songs that they would sing, doing extremely hard manual labor, and so automatically you're going to get extremely vivid, strong images from this type of from the sound of people who weren't necessarily musicians. These are regular people who used music as almost as a form of transcendence and transcending the difficulty of life, and so when you're able to hear music used in that form, to me it's extremely refreshing, because a lot of the music that we hear nowadays in the way that our culture functions, music is often used more functionally as something for strictly performance. And so within listening to these old recordings of these prison inmates singing while they're chopping wood, or while they're or railroad or hitting railroads, or picking cotton, or farming for 12 hours a day, and hearing how music was used is very, very powerful for me, and it definitely has inspired a lot of ideas and compositions. And also within this idea too, we're also exploring, for me, the African American experience and how slavery evolved as well, because the prison system at one time took over for slavery at a point. There's so much upheaval during that time, and to be able to hear the sounds of that time is going to have very, once again, loud images just by hearing some of these voices.
What's the research process that you went through? Again, just thinking about these three recordings, or these three field recordings. How did you find them?
Yes.
How many did you have to listen to? Were you looking for certain stuff, or did you kind of go in with attention to texture and history?
Yeah, great question. Initially, it was, let me figure out how to find anything, just because a lot of the material of these early work songs or these early spirituals, they're very difficult to find. I mean, I happened to stumble on a couple things online that were more popular, and then kind of through going through the back end and figuring out licensing, publishing, and I eventually started happened to see a phone number here or email here, and then I'm calling an email here, and all of a sudden it's eventually leading me back to where ultimately where the source of is, which is who owns the actual material, which of course, Library of Congress here, just a lot of those strains led me here, and a lot of times I'm listening for maybe a theme. Okay. When I'm composing or producing, maybe there's a theme that I'm listening to, or maybe there is a sound that's connected to a certain concept that has to do with the blues. Okay. Within jazz, the blues is just a huge root. And so being able to figure out where the blues actually came from, and to hear how the blues, how it's came about, you know, you can't really get that so much from a book. You have to, there's so much of a lineage that comes just through just sonically. And so I was absorbing everything, and a lot of times a lot of my decisions weren't necessarily oftentimes conceptually or intellectually based. They are more feeling something and being moved, and then really using that emotion to create the forward momentum of the composition or the idea. And so, you know, I'm just also really glad to be able to be in a position to help bring more of that out into the forefront, because it was very difficult, once again, for me to discover a lot of this. And so if I can help show where it comes from or where it's located, and to show the power and strength of it, you know, that's another goal of what I'm doing with Transcendence.
Great. Yeah. Well, thank you, and I hope to see you in the reading room again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, thanks.